All right. Welcome, everybody, to another installment. I think this is our 4,000th installment of Reader Meets Writer, but apparently y'all are enjoying it because you keep coming back. But this has been an excellent opportunity to meet and hear from writers that you would otherwise be meeting and hearing from at your favorite independent bookstore. This is put together by SIBA, which stands for the Southern Independent Bookseller Alliance. And SIBA represents almost 700 independently owned bookstores throughout the Southeast. And tonight, perhaps you are here because one of those independently owned bookstores invited you. So when you hear about Lara's wonderful book, please consider purchasing that book from the bookstore that invited you instead of that obscure, relatively unknown website named after a tiny river. So please support local independent bookstores. Keep art alive in your community. My name's Wiley Cash. I am a novelist living and working on the coast of North Carolina. If my face looks a little pink and I seem a little flushed, that's because I just finished cutting the grass about 30 seconds ago. But tonight is very exciting. We have a wonderful debut author with us tonight, and I'll tell you a little bit about her, and then I will let her take it away and tell you all about her book. But before we begin, I want to remind everyone at the bottom of your screen here on Zoom is a little button that says chat. If you have a question for Lara during her presentation, type it in and put it in the chat box right there. But make sure to do two things. Share the name of your favorite independent bookstore or your home independent bookstore and your name. And then when I ask her your question, I'll say your name and I'll give a shout out to your favorite bookstore. So please start firing your questions away as she talks. But for now, I would like to introduce Lara Prescott. She's the author of The Secrets We Kept, an instant New York Times bestseller, and a Hello Sunshine Reese Witherspoon book club pick. I was joking with her before we came on that this is the kind of book that when it's pitched to an agent, the agent just asks it to be printed with New York Times bestseller on the cover of the hardcover before it even comes out. And that's definitely what's happened. It's her debut, and it'll be translated into over 30 languages and adapted for television by the Ink Factory and Mark Platt Productions. She received her MFA from the Michener Center at University of Texas in Austin, where she still resides. And she studied political science at American University and international development in Namibia and South Africa. And she worked as a campaign political consultant before she was writing. Her work has appeared all over the place in wonderful literary journals like Southern Review and Crazyhorse. And she is here with us tonight. So I will let her take it away and ask you to please ask your questions and share the name of your home bookstore. And we'll pitch them to Lara when she's done speaking, but I'll turn it over to her.
Hello, hi everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I'm live in my writing shed in the backyard of my Austin, Texas home. You can see it's pretty small, but I'm happy to be here with you all. And yes, please support your indie bookstores. I second Wiley. Also make sure you're buying his books too. My indie bookstore here in Austin's Book People, which is just such a gem of the city, and I can't wait to be back in action at the store itself. But in the meantime, you know, calling up your local bookstore if they have curbside pickup or online orders, please do so. We need books now more than ever. I wanted to give a little, I'm doing something little different. This is actually my last stop on my virtual paperback book tour, which has been really great for the paperback of The Secrets We Kept. And I kind of figured, how can I make virtual events, you know, more visual? Like, what else can we do to make them a little bit more special? And I decided to try out something a little bit new for you guys, and it's to show some of the photos I've collected, along with some archival photos that go along with the making of this novel, The Secrets We Kept, and a little bit about the story behind the story for those of you who haven't read it. And if you have read it, you'll get to, you know, see a little bit more of what happened and why I came to write this book. So I'm going to share my screen in just a moment. But yes, if you have any questions after my little, you know, photo presentation, I'm going to do a little reading and then we'll answer all the questions you have. So just use the chat button on the bottom and I'll be happy to answer them. So I'm going to try to share the screen now. It worked during the test, so I think it will work. All right. Let's see. Okay, can everyone see it? Is it working? All right. So obviously this is the lovely paperback version of The Secrets We Kept. If you have it in hardback, it has a whole other version. And I just wanted to start off by saying how I came to this book. And it all began with these two. These are my parents back in the 60s. And my parents, Bob and Patty, one of their favorite movies, the 1965 David Lean film, as well as one of their favorite books of Dr. Zhivago, was why they named me Lara, after the heroine of Boris Pasternack's Dr. Zhivago. So when you ever ask, who's responsible for me writing this book, my mom always claims she is, but I don't know about that. But maybe it had something to do with it. So I grew up watching the David Lean adaptation, which I think is just one of the most beautiful film adaptations of all time. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. And so that's a screenshot from the filming of that movie. I grew up watching it, but it wasn't until I was 15, 16, when I was in my Russian literature phase, that I started to finally read Dr. Zhivago for the first time. I picked up the big tome of a book and I read it. And of course, I was really interested in the love story, for those of you who have read it, between Yuri and Lara, but I was really surprised to find out that it's so much more. This is a work about war. This is a work about individuals and their responses to great moments in history. And I just was so in love with the book that it became one of those touchstones for me, where every few years I would read it again. And I've read this book numerous times. And this is a photograph of my actual copy, and it's one of the original Max Hayward translated copies that my mom gave me way back in the day. And after that, I had this lifelong connection with Dr. Zhivago, but I never really thought this would be the first novel I would write. It really came as a surprise to me. But as I'll get into in a little bit, it was something that tied in all of these different passions of my life. After I went to college, I studied in politics, and I went into political campaigns, and I was very interested in propaganda and how words can shape people's hearts and minds. And so when I heard about that in 2014, that the CIA had released about 100 documents detailing their mission to use Dr. Zhivago as a weapon, I was absolutely, awestruck. I knew that I needed to find out everything about this. But more on that in a second. I want to go back to Pasternack. So this is Boris Pasternack, a young Boris, very beautiful man, and he knows it. And what I wanted to say about Boris, when I was reading this book, and you learn more about his history, it's utterly fascinating. Boris was known as one of the most famous living Soviet writers, primarily because he was a poet. And Dr. Zhivago was actually his first and his only book. And it was what he considered to be his life's work. And everything that he had written before was leading up to this moment. And while he was writing it, pretty soon word got around, and he was writing it from Moscow, where he lived, that what he was writing may contain anti-Soviet content. And if you've read Dr. Zhivago, you might wonder, what is this anti-Soviet content that's in this book that's mostly known for its, romantic love story? And well, the answer is Boris wanted to paint a realist picture of the aftermath of the Russian Revolution. And in doing so, he wanted to paint what individuals felt about it and how their feelings changed over time and different experiences that those individuals had, either pro or against. It was just painting it as it was, and there was no singular, this is good, there's no questioning it. There was all sorts of individuals thinking about, is this helping me? Is this hurting me? Have I suffered? Have I profited? And just having that individuals have different opinions was what made it so subversive. But he did finish the book. When he did finish the book, he sent it out to all of his publishers, and they basically it was just crickets. And I kind of compare that to, if Stephen King wrote a novel and sent it to his publisher and said, hey, here's my new novel, and he didn't hear back. It's just unheard of. This was the most famous living writer in the Soviet Union. He didn't hear anything back, and pretty soon it was found out that this book was not going to be published in the Soviet Union. And if it wasn't published in the Soviet Union, he was not allowed to have it published anywhere. And along comes Sergio D'Angelo, who is an Italian agent for Feltrinelli, who was a Milan publisher. And he came to Boris's dacha. This is a picture I took of Boris's house in Peredelkino, which was about 20 miles outside of Moscow. He came to Boris's house and said, I've heard you're writing this book. Do you mind if I share it with my publisher in Italy? And Sergio didn't really understand, the danger he was putting everybody in. He just thought, of course they're going to publish eventually, and then Italy will publish, and my editor, will be happy about it. But Boris definitely knew what he had when he gave it to Sergio. He said, you are hereby invited to my execution. And that's what he said when he gave his manuscript to the Italians. But Sergio eventually got it out of Soviet Russia into the hands of Sergio D'Angelo, who was the person responsible for first publishing Dr. Zhivago in Italian. It was first published in Italian. And here is my copy of a first edition Italian, which is really one of my prized possessions. My husband gave it to me when I completed the novel. And so this was an Italian version. And as soon it started spreading throughout the Western world, everyone wanted to read it. In fact, it knocked Lolita off the top of the charts of New York Times bestseller list. And with that, of course, the CIA starts hearing word about this book. This is a picture, an archival photo of the original CIA headquarters, which was in downtown Washington, D.C. It was referred to as their E Street complex. And so this is, where the CIA is first hearing about this book. And they decide to do something interesting with it. They decide to make it a mission. And the reason why, and this is a quote from a CIA chief of covert ops, is that they really believed in the power of books to significantly have an effect on readers, which of course I still believe today. And I think readers all over the world would agree with me, and also writers, that it is a powerful medium, not only to really connect readers with people who might be very different from them or have different opinions, but have this empathy gap where you can get inside their minds and walk in their shoes and feel what it is to have this moment in history happen. So they really believed in it. And this is interesting. This is from my downloaded archives of the CIA's documents detailing this Zhivago mission. And I have it highlighted. This is one of the first memos the CIA sent out about this book. And they said this book has great propaganda value, and it just goes on and on about how if they were to smuggle this book back into the Soviet Union where it was banned, citizens would then question, why has my government kept this from me? And plant the seed that, maybe things aren't as well as we think they are. So they did. They printed these beautiful, and this is not my own copy, unfortunately. I do not own a CIA copy of the blue linen cover that they used, but they printed these Dr. Zhivagos in Russian, and they also, I don't know why that red line came up, but they printed these Dr. Zhivagos in Russian, and they used venues like the World's Fair in Brussels as a staging ground to smuggle them in behind the Iron Curtain and give them to Soviets who were visiting the fair. And this is just a picture of this. That's the U.S. pavilion in the middle, the one that looks kind of like a wagon wheel or a UFO. And this is a copy of my brochure that I got for the World's Fair. It's a Soviet pavilion. And it's really interesting because they have a little map on the left-hand side where it shows where the Soviet pavilion was, but nowhere on that map do you see the United States pavilion, even though it's right next door to the Soviet pavilion. So they made these copies. They gave them to Russian citizens who then smuggled it in back behind the Iron Curtain. And soon everybody wanted to read it, and it entered the black market, and the CIA, patted themselves on the back for this mission. But it got even more intense when Boris Pasternack wins the Nobel Prize. And this is a picture of him accepting the Nobel Prize. His wife is next to him and toasting about it. He was someone who was always considered in contention for the prize for years and years and years, mostly for his poetry. But this is when he finally won it, shortly after the CIA began this mission. But due to Soviet pressure, he had to turn down the prize. He rejected the prize about a week later after accepting it, saying that he could not accept the prize. He was under tremendous pressure from the government, who threatened his life, who threatened to expel him from the Soviet Union, and just to make his life a living hell. And so he finally relented and did not accept the Nobel Prize. And the CIA, of course, took this as, more free publicity all over the world. It was the talk of the world. They printed more editions of this Dr. Zhivago. This is a copy that I do own. This is a picture of my miniature edition, which it looks bigger in the picture, but it's actually very, very small. It's printed on Bible stock paper, so that they could easily fit these copies of Dr. Zhivago in people's pockets or their purses. And all of this, was followed shortly after Boris Pasternack died. Here's an archival picture of his funeral in Peredelkino. And here's a picture when I visited Peredelkino at his gravesite, which was just an unbelievable experience for me to go to Russia and walk through those woods that Boris walked in with Olga, and learn more about his story and what it would have been like to have lived it. But of course, those of you who have read my novel know that I don't really focus on Boris Pasternack, although he is a voice in the novel. I focus more on women's stories. So part of that is the women's typing pool of the early days of the CIA is one of my main narrators throughout the book. And this is a picture the CIA released of the typing pool back in the E Street complex. And I had this picture up as my desktop screensaver, I guess, for months and months and months while I was writing this book. And I just wanted to read just a really short excerpt of the typist voice, so you can get a feel for them. But they kind of function as this almost Greek chorus, and they narrate the book of, the Zhivago mission and why this book was important, but also what the culture was like in the CIA and the misogyny and what it was like to be a woman who was very overqualified for their job, but was, put in the typing pool and wasn't really allowed to advance. So these are the people that really first came to me when I was writing this novel, quite by accident. It was just a voice that I was experimenting with, and it was the first voice I heard because I was reading all of these memos, like the one I just had in the slide, and I was thinking, who are the women that typed these memos? And, it just spiraled into this research hole of the early women of the CIA. So I'm going to read just, like 2 minutes of the prologue. And for those of you who haven't read the book, this is just the very beginning, so I don't really have to tell you much more than this is the voice of the typists. And it takes place in the late 1950s, Washington, D.C. I'm going to take a sip of water first. We typed 100 words per minute and never missed a syllable. Our identical desks were each equipped with a mint shell Royal Quiet Deluxe typewriter, a black Western Electric rotary phone, and a stack of yellow steno pads. Our fingers flew across the keys. Our clacking was constant. We'd pause only to answer the phone or to take a drag of a cigarette. Some of us managed to master both without missing a beat. The men would arrive around 10. One by one, they'd pull us into their offices. We'd sit in small chairs pushed into the corners, while they'd sit behind their large mahogany desks or pace the carpet while speaking to the ceiling. We'd listen. We'd record. We were their audience of one for their memos, reports, write-ups, lunch orders. Sometimes they'd forget we were there, and we'd learn much more. Who was trying to box out whom? Who was making a power play? Who was having an affair? Who was in and who was out? Sometimes they'd refer to us not by name, but by hair color or body type. Blondie, red, tits, We had our secret names for them too. Grabber, Coffee Breath, Teeth. They would call us girls, but we were not. We came to the agency by way of Radcliffe, Vassar, Smith. We were our first daughters of our families to earn degrees. Some of us spoke Mandarin. Some could fly planes. Some of us could handle a Colt 1873 better than John Wayne. But all we were asked when interviewed was, "Can you type?" It's been said that the typewriter was built for women, that to truly make the key sing requires the feminine touch, that our narrow fingers are suited for the device, that while men lay claim to cars and bombs and rockets, the typewriter is a machine of our own. Well, we don't know about all that. But what we will say that as we typed, our fingers became extensions of our brains, with no delay between the words coming out of their mouths, words they told us not to remember, and our keys slapping ink onto paper. And when you think about it like that, about the mechanics of it all, it's almost poetic. Almost. But did we aspire to tension headaches and sore wrists and bad posture? Is that what we dreamed of in high school when studying twice as hard as the boys? Was clerical work what we had in mind when opening the fat manila envelopes containing our college acceptance letters? Or where we thought we'd be headed as we sat in those white wooden chairs on the 50-yard line, capped and gowned, receiving the rolled parchments that promised we were qualified to do so much more? Most of us viewed the job in the typing pool as temporary. We wouldn't admit it aloud, not even to each other. But many of us believed it would be a first rung towards achieving what the men got right out of college: positions as officers, our own offices with lamps that gave off a flattering light, plush rugs, wooden desks, our own typists, taking down our dictation. We thought of it as a beginning, not an end, despite what we've been told all our lives. So that's just a bit of the beginning of the secrets we kept. And these women that I began researching, I kind of went into some of the inspirations of the characters in my novel, Sally and Irina, especially Sally, who got her start. She's a fictional character, but she's based on a lot of real women's stories. And one of those women is Virginia Hall, who's pictured in this slide during World War II, just being absolute badass that she was. And the more I learned about these women and how during the war they did absolutely heroic deeds, like they spread information, they were involved in blowing up bridges, they were involved in smuggling French resistance fighters to the front lines. And, you know, I never heard about these women before, you know, doing this research. And I'm so happy that books like A Woman of No Importance about Virginia Hall and other books like that are now coming out so that these stories are told. Of course, I also, in the East, you know, in the Soviet side of my story, I focus on Boris Pasternack, but mostly I focus on his muse, a woman named Olga, and here she is pictured here. And she was the inspiration behind Lara and Dr. Zhivago. So of course I was automatically wanting to know who was this woman that inspired one of the all-time greatest literary characters. And she suffered greatly for her association with Boris. And I write throughout the book everything that she went through during this time for him, including not only going to the Gulag because she wouldn't give him up and tell the Soviet authorities what he was writing. She went not once, but twice. And here's a picture of her mugshot, basically. And so, although this book is, you know, it's a fictional take on this real life mission, and I had many real details, there's a weaving of fictional characters and also historical characters. And it is really anchored by women's voices, which is something that I didn't really plan. But, you know, after I was looking at the final first draft, I was like, wow, I really was more interested in maybe the women behind the men, and decided to really anchor the story from their eyes. Of course, you know, it all ends that Boris, he never really wanted his book to be a weapon of propaganda. I think he was horrified by that fact. And, you know, it wasn't his idea that the CIA smuggle it. His only thought was that he wanted his novel to be read. And that is what he courageously risked his own life to do. And I hope if you've read my book or haven't read my book that you definitely pick up Dr. Zhivago because it's an absolute classic. So that's, you know, the end of my photo. So I'm going to turn it off my screen. And I think we're back to the, yes, are we back?
We are back, yeah.
All right.
So a couple of things, Laura. So if there are any writers who are watching tonight who are going to join us for Reader Meets Writer in the future, all of them are panicking because they don't have awesome slideshows.
Oh.
They're all like, great, now I got to do a slideshow for my book.
So I got this tip from from the man who wrote A Gentleman in Moscow, Amor Tolstoy.
Never heard of it.
He does something similar, and I was doing, this is the first, I'm a debut author. I didn't know what I was doing. And actually one of my friends who works at Book People said, sometimes it's interesting if you're doing historical fiction, or your book is based in this moment of history, to actually show people the history and show like some of your research. And it seems to be a big hit. So that's why I started making, and I have all these art, and I have like the first editions and all this stuff I've collected. So it's kind of
it's brilliant.
Yeah, it's just showing it off. So I was like, can I do this virtually? I don't know. We'll see.
I loved it. And the photos were so beautiful too.
My husband took all the fancy book shots. I cannot take credit for that. He's a very good photographer.
No, it was fantastic. I've got an Amor Tolstoy story. I was in an event with him one time when at a American Bookseller Association event when his first book came out, and it was like blowing the doors off everything. And I get there, and he's so handsome, and he dresses so well. And I was thinking, like, I need more reasons to hate you. And I was with my wife, which made it worse, because she loved the book, and she was like, he's right there. And I was like, and I'm right here. A couple of things before we take questions. People are stacking up questions because they loved everything about that. Every time I hand in a manuscript, I'm going to write, this is your invitation to my execution, with no context at all. I'm just going to give it to my editor without explaining what it means.
I love that. Maybe I'll do that for the next one. It feels like that anyway. For him, it was actually true. For us, it might just be our own feeling.
I might just start saying it when I like make dinner at night. Be like, this is your invitation. And then another thing, I love that your husband got you a first edition of Dr. Zhivago when your book came out.
Yeah. That's
amazing.
It was, so he got me both that first edition, and he got me along midway through the writing process, the Dr. Zhivago CIA edition, which the little tiny one. And that was for my birthday. And he was like, I had no idea that he had planned any of this. And he was very upset that something was going on. I was like, what's going on? And he was like freaking out. And he said, your birthday present got lost in the mail, and I don't know what to do. And I was like, well, that's okay. I just thought it was, a book, like just something regular. We usually don't give each other extravagant presents. And he told me that it was a first edition, not first edition, that it was the CIA miniature edition, and it was coming from Russia, and it got lost. But eventually it was found.
It didn't get lost. They were just they were refashioning some of the pages to slide the microphone in.
No, honestly, something funny went down, and I could go into my conspiracy theories, but it arrived, the man who had to bring it over, and I won't say because he had to bring it over on a plane, because I won't say why, but it may or may not be legal to purchase antiques and bring them to Soviet Union from Russia here. But
good thing it's just the two of us on here.
I know. I don't know anything about that, but I know it came over on the plane. He mailed it. We got the tracking code, and then it stopped in New York, and then no one knew what happened to it. When we got it, it was like razored open, so they were definitely checking it out.
Well, that's cool. When my first book came out, part of the title comes from Thomas Wolfe's final novel, and my wife got me a first edition of Thomas Wolfe's final novel, and she gave it to me as I was leaving for tour, and she was like, I wanted to give you this book as a good luck present, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so touched. But then the book is titled You Can't Go Home Again. And I was like literally on the way out the door to go on book tour. Like, take this with you and take the title to heart. I was like, okay.
Like, oh, bye.
But I want to get to everybody's questions. But I also noticed that I think it was the CIA edition you showed looks like your Bulgaria book jacket.
I know, yeah. I think they might have taken that as a cue because I shared all of these photographs that I had of all my artifacts with all my publishers. So I think they did take it as
Yeah,
a
it's like a
cue.
beautiful robin's egg blue.
Yeah.
So on to the questions. We've got quite a lot of them. Let's see. Carolyn from Breckenridge, Ernest and Hadley, she said, how many years of research does this book represent, and how long did it take to actually write? So, I know you probably don't want to go into too much detail, but can you talk about your approach to research and balancing research and writing?
Yeah, so it started off, it was very research heavy, and I learned about the CIA mission in 2014 because that's when the CIA released these documents. It was not known that they had this mission before that. It was a rumor but never confirmed. So I started there. I started looking at the CIA's website every day. There's about 100 documents, and just letting my research go from there. And soon enough, I was reading everything about Boris Pasternack, about Olga Ivanskaya, about what it was like to live in DC in the 1950s, what it was like to work in the early days of the CIA. And this was all before I wrote a word of it. So it was a year almost of just research and thinking, could this be a novel? I wasn't like, this is going to be my novel, I know for sure, but I was obsessed with the research, which I think, if you're writing in a different time period, you have to become kind of obsessive, as you probably know, with the time period and just anything you can get your hands on. And then I started writing it when I moved to Austin, Texas. And I had been working full time, and this was my opportunity because I had a fellowship at UT to just focus on this book. And I started writing it. And the 3 years that I was at UT, I was writing and researching at the same time. And so the research just continued. But I think what I think about it is there's a point where you need to know everything and then some, but not all that research should end up in the book. I mean, you're not writing a nonfiction book, you're writing scenes of characters and people interacting. And so you might need to know that to base yourself on how you're going to write their dialogue or what they might say to each other, where they might go. But a lot of that is just to prepare you to write that. And some of it, of course, ends up in the book, but you don't want to be too fact heavy. It's like one of my pet peeves. And I'm just thinking, well, this is not as good as reading a nonfiction version. You're writing a novel, and it should feel like a novel. But sometimes I use, research as procrastination, and I just kept researching because I didn't want to write, because writing's very difficult. And I would just research the day away, which is what I'm doing now.
I can totally understand that, because research, somebody has already done all the hard work and you're just uncovering it. But then when you're just sitting there and it's just you and the screen, and you have to take all of these notes you've got and not be constricted by them and also be creative, it's a tough balancing act. And I always think about it in terms of doing research when a historical time period. It's like trying to get the weather of the day right so that your characters can move in a way that corresponds to the way the weather is. That's kind of how I think about trying to do research, to balance how the weather of the era or the time,
Yeah,
that's hung up like on shoes. Like, what kind of shoes did people wear,
Yeah, there are some things that I'm like, I know this is not going to be in there. Why am I researching this? But then there's other things that you would just think, oh, this is not going to end up, and you get led to a really interesting tidbit that inspires a whole scene. So, I think as long as it's propelling you to keep writing, then it's not a problem. If it prohibits you from writing, then, maybe put the research aside and just keep writing.
Once upon a time, my older sister and I were at the Biltmore House when we lived in Asheville, and we were on a tour, and there was a guy there like investigating the doors really closely, and we started talking to him, and he said, well, I have a season's pass, and every time I come, I look at something different, and today I'm just looking at the doorknobs. And every time I write, I think there's going to be somebody out there who's just going to pay attention to the doorknobs, and then they're going to complain like, you got all the doorknobs wrong.
You definitely will hear from those people. So don't worry if you got it wrong. If you got the doorknobs wrong, you'll get an email from someone.
Oh yeah. They didn't even have doorknobs on Mars then.
And it made its way into the paperback edits, which I was thankful for. But it was that whiteout, which appears in my novel. It had existed, but it wasn't used extensively yet. It was the next year that it was used extensively, but I heard a whole thing about
Oh my gosh. So,
but I had to change it.
oh my gosh. So we got another question here. Let's see. Jane from Copperfish and Punta Gorda. She says, "What year did Boris die?" And I think was it 1960?
61.
61. And she says, "Was it suspicious? What were the circumstances of his death?"
No, so he was older, but he was this type of older gentleman who always looked like 20 years younger. So it was very hard to like put an age on him. But the last few years, starting with, all the surveillance that he was under, all of the pressure he was under, all of the back and forth with the government, it really, really aged him rapidly. And I think a lot of people say, his health just absolutely declined, especially after the Nobel Prize. It just declined rapidly, and he was a shell of his former self. So nothing suspicious other than, I think, just the tremendous pressure and hardship that he went through really affected him.
What was he like as a person? I mean, I know that in my very limited knowledge of Russia at that time, there was a lot of mysticism that was finding its way. Was he a mystical person? Was he?
He was a very much, of the earth type person. I think where he was happiest was in his garden, in the fields, and it's working, tilling the soil, and his kitchen garden, and being in the country, I think was really important to him. And one of the reasons why he would never leave Russia, even though he was under all this pressure, people were like, why don't you just get out of there? He refused to leave, even though the rest of his family, his sisters and his mother and father, left years before that. I don't think he didn't have like the Tolstoy, and it wasn't really mystical. He was born Jewish, but he converted to Christianity. And I do think in Zhivago, there's a lot of Christian themes that you can see there. He was a funny guy. I mean, he had a dark sense of, that gallows humor that's infamous, and, Russian gallows humor. He would be under surveillance and just joke around about talking to the bugs in the ceiling, and say, how are you today, lamp? And how are, just this really dark humor that I think came through. And he was extremely charming, extremely charismatic. Everyone wanted to be around him. He was very popular, and, women loved him, men loved him. He was one of those people that you just wanted to be around, and was fascinating. But he was also singularly focused on his work, I think, to the detriment of everything else in his life, to his family, to his lover, etc. Everything was behind the work.
Well, you can tell, I mean, some people kind of vamp for pictures, and some people are exactly who they are in pictures. And in photos of him, that's exactly what he looks like. I mean, he looks like somebody with a burning intensity, a singular focus. We've got another question from Nicole Bird in Orlando, Writer's Block Bookstore. She says, I love the book. With all the interwoven storylines, was that an element that arose organically while writing? And what was your process in tracking and structuring all the storylines to kind of braid the novel together?
Yeah, so I originally was trying to write it from one perspective, but soon, like shortly after beginning writing, I knew this would be a polyphonic novel. So multiple narrators, multiple, threads going throughout it. And the first draft was just like this big giant mess. I would just write one character for a long time and then switch. I did not have, I did not know what that structure was going to look like, how I was going to weave everything together, until the second and third drafts. And I actually had like a whiteboard up where I would have different colors that were different characters and what their threads were, and like moving things around constantly. It looked, and then I had like note cards. It looked like a crime scene investigator. Like, this goes here, this goes here. But the structure was constantly being fine-tuned up until, the final draft, or until I started working with my editor on it. It was just constantly in flux. So sometimes you have to, I think that's the kind of writer I am. I'm going to write long, and then I'm going to find that plot and that structure after that point in time, which is frustrating, but it is what it is.
Well, it made for a hell of a book. Congratulations on all the success. And
well, thank you.
yeah. Is the paperback tour largely behind you, it sounds like?
Yeah, so yeah, it came out June 30th, and I've been touring around from my shed here in Austin. And I've been doing I'll be doing book clubs and different events throughout the fall, but this is like the main paperback book tour.
Well, that shed is sweet.
Yeah,
I
it
am
even has an
envious
air
of that.
conditioner because it's super hot here in Texas. So I have
Did
like a
y'all
little
build
air.
that, or was that a pre-made, or?
It was a pre-made tool shed when we bought the house. It didn't, I mean, we put up the walls, we put up the air conditioner, painted it, put like a little carpet down, did the floor. My husband did most of it, but with help from a carpenter too. And this is where I work, and it's
I
good.
love it.
I have a 5-month-old, so it's good to be able to come out to the shed and
Yeah.
get some stuff done. I don't know. I don't know what else I would do.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Laura, and thank you for everybody who joined us tonight for our 4,000th episode of Reader Meets Writer. We're going to try to hit 10,000 before next week. So thank you all for joining us tonight, and please support your independent bookstore. We had so many comments tonight from bookstores around the country. Copperfish Books. We had some malaprops. We got Novel in Memphis. We've got so many. We got so many great bookstores represented here, and thank you all for continuing to tune into these. It means so much to us. Thank you for supporting these writers whose books have been maybe affected by COVID, and these booksellers who've been affected by COVID. So once again, thanks for gathering with us here tonight. Please dance with the one that brought you. Purchase Laura's book from the independent bookstore or an independent bookstore of your choice, and join us next Tuesday, for Reader Meets Writer. Have a great night.
Thank you guys. Take care.